second informational forum on the 2026 California ballot propositions. Like our candidate forums back in February, your regional directors are providing these forums to provide you with information about the issues that are important to Democrats around the state. Whether you're joining us to learn more about the propositions prior to next week's CADEM Executive Board meeting in San Diego, or you're here to learn more about the propositions prior to the general election this fall, we are here to discuss the issues where possible with the campaigns to give you the information you need to make your decision to support or oppose these various propositions. Yesterday, we looked at the propositions covering housing and property use, election reform, funding, as well as a couple of propositions regarding budgets and taxes. Today, we will take on the remaining budgets and taxes propositions, including the so-called millionaires tax proposition, the billionaires tax proposition, and related propositions. Let's take a look at an overview of these propositions. And it always takes a moment to get these things going, so one moment. All right. So as we start, of course, again, we have this important disclosure. These public forums are not sponsored by, endorsed by, affiliated with, authorized by, or coordinated with the California Democratic Party, its executive board, its staff, or any of its official bodies. Nothing in these forums or any related materials should be interpreted as implying the California Democratic Party endorsement, sponsorship, approval, or involvement of any kind. The California Democratic Party is neither liable nor responsible for any information shared at these forums. These forums are an independent project organized by a coalition of individuals who hold the title of regional director, but are acting solely in their individual capacities. Any use of the term regional director is for identification purposes only and does not imply that the California Democratic Party is involved in, connected to, associated with, or supportive of these events. So now we get into the propositions. Proposition 3, the California Children's Education and Healthcare Protection Act of 2026. The Secretary of State says that it will renew the additional income taxes enacted with the approval of Proposition 38 in 2012 that fund education and early childhood programs. Now, again, we have these graphics that come from Alfred Tu out of Region 3. From his perspective, it maintains school funding. It renews existing income tax on the top 2% highest income Californians. Currently, singles earning over $360,000 or joint filers earning over $721,000. Funds early child care education, K through 12 schools, and community colleges. Then we move on to I should also note that Proposition 3, although it's called the California Children's Education and Healthcare Protection Act, you will often hear this referred to as the millionaire tax. Proposition 40 is the 2026 Billionaire Tax Act. The Secretary of State says that it will levy a one-time 5% tax on the accumulated wealth, including shares of capital stocks, bonds, or other evidences of indebtedness, and any legal or equitable interest of billionaires in the state to fund state-funded healthcare programs such as Medi-Cal. From Alfred's perspective, the billionaire tax is a one-time 5% wealth tax on billionaires. Money from the tax would replace healthcare funding cut by the federal government, as well as education, EBT, and other food assistance. Proposition 41, which is called the Improving Transparency, Effectiveness, and Efficiency in California Government Act of 2026. Before I go on, I want to make a note. They say that it's improving transparency, effectiveness, and efficiency. This is the longest title of any of the propositions, which itself is not effective or efficient. And when you take a look, when we start talking about it, I ask you to take a look and see how transparent it actually is. That's my perspective. But we'll go on to the Secretary of State, where it says that it will require state laws or ballot initiatives levying a special tax enacted after January 1st, 2026 to require that government entities or departments receive revenue from the new tax to eliminate their lowest performing programs and reinvest those savings in high performing programs. From Alfred, the Democrats' perspective, it will block the billionaire tax, creates new rules and paperwork applying to new special taxes, and one of these rules would cancel out the Prop 40 billionaire tax. Proposition 42, the Retirement and Personal Savings Protection Act of 2026. Secretary of State says that it will prohibit the enactment of new taxes after January 1st, 2026 on ownership or accumulation of retirement holdings, individually owned assets, and other forms of personal savings. I do want to point out, it says January 1st of 2026. That is this year. It's not pointing to a future. It's pointing to the current year. From Alfred's perspective, he says that it will ban wealth taxes, such as Prop 40, bans taxes on financial assets and other personal property, including the Prop 40 billionaire tax. California does not have any other wealth taxes, and according to Alfred, does not plan to do so. I do want to put a caveat there. That is Alfred's perspective. We do not know for certain what California plans to do or what the future holds for wealth taxes in the future. Do want to again say thank you to Alfred Twu for the graphics and his participation and in dedication to the Democratic Party. All right, now this always happens when you have multiple screens open. One moment. So as I mentioned, we want to acknowledge the graphics and the proposition were provided by Region 3 Delegate and Secretary to the California Democratic Renters Caucus, Alfred Twu. As always, we want to thank Alfred for his amazing artistic talents and his contributions to the Democratic Party. Before we get started, we need to note that although we reached out to the various campaigns, not everyone got back to us to participate in these forums. During the introduction to each proposition, we will note the general positions of those supporting the proposition and those who are opposing it. Beyond that, the campaigns will have had their opportunity to provide their views by participating in the forum, and those that are participating have chosen to make the most of that opportunity. It should be noted that when only one side has chosen to appear to speak on the proposition. In many circumstances, it should be obvious that the other side has chosen not to appear simply because Democrats are not their target audience, especially leaders within the Democratic Party. We also wish to emphasize that these are informational forums. We are attempting to learn as much as we can about the issues in order to make an informed decision. We should also note that the speakers who appear on behalf of the campaigns are coming into the forum blind. We do not share our questions in advance. All right, let's get started. Christine, you want to get us kicked off?
Thank you so much, Jeff. So this is now part 2 of the budgets and taxes. We heard yesterday about Prop 2 and Prop 43. So today we start off with Prop 3, the billionaire's tax. What it does. Proposition 3 would make... Sorry.
Millionaire's tax.
Millionaire's tax. Oops, sorry. Where is it? Anyways, billionaire's tax. Millionaire's tax. What it does. Proposition 3 would make permanent California's additional state income tax rates on the state's highest income earners. Voters originally approved these higher tax rates in 2012 as a temporary measure, and they are currently scheduled to expire in 2031. If Prop 3 passes, those higher tax rates would remain in effect indefinitely. According to the Legislative Analyst Office, the measure would preserve billions of dollars in annual state revenue, which much of which would continue to support public education, while also providing funding for other state priorities through the general fund. Supporters argue that Prop 3 asks the wealthiest Californians to continue paying a larger share of state taxes in order to maintain funding for schools, healthcare, and other essential public services. Supporters include the California Teachers Association, the California Federation of Teachers, and the California School Employees Association. Opponents contend that making the tax permanent could make California less competitive, encourage high-income taxpayers to relocate, and increase the state's reliance on a relatively small group of taxpayers for a significant portion of its revenues. Opponents include the California Taxpayers Association, and as voters consider Prop 3, they will be weighing questions of tax fairness, economic competitiveness, and how best to fund California's long-term priorities. So we have a couple questions, and speaking in favor of Prop 3, we have Michael Borges from CTA. Welcome, and you have 2 minutes to introduce yourself and Prop 3. Take it away.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Jeff. So yes, I'm Michael Borges, political action manager with the California Teachers Association. The summary that Christine just did hit it kind of right on the head with what Prop 3 is all about, right? Back in the Great Recession, we were in dire financial straits in the state budget. And at that point, California Democratic Party and a big coalition supported what was Prop 30 to increase both the income tax rates, top three rates, 1%, 2%, and 3% on our state's highest earners, as well as a sales tax at that point. We came back in 2016 to pass Proposition 55, which dropped the sales tax, which I know folks are generally regarded as the most regressive part of taxation, right? Dropped the sales tax and kept the tax on the highest earners. That passed, again, with support of the Democratic Party and a broad coalition in 2016. But the problem was it only extended those current tax rates through the end of 2030. So what we're really seeking now is support of the Democratic Party, along with other allies, to make these taxes permanent. We know it's a part of the California Democratic Party platform under the Workers, Jobs, and Reindustrialization section to support a more progressive income tax, excuse me. And this is really what that's all about. It's not a new tax. It just maintains the current rates, but keeps it on quite frankly, California's wealthiest folks. The bottom rate increases 1% is only on income for couples that make over $740,000 per year. So it's income after that, right? We are not talking about affecting middle class or other voters. This is really California's wealthiest 1 to 2% of all tax filers paying this tax. And while the money goes into to help public education, it does fill the Prop 98 guarantee. And I'll stop since my time is up.
Thank you so much, Michael. So first question. California relies heavily on income taxes from high earners. Does Prop 3 straighten or increase the state's dependence on a relatively small group of taxpayers?
So it'll really just maintain it. And I believe I can put things in the chat. So what I will also drop is the California Budget and Policy Center. Oh, I can't. All right. Has a great explainer, but folks can Google it then. Since Prop 30 was actually enacted to now, the number of filers that pay these taxes actually increased, right? Because what we've seen is stratification in our tax base, right? Where the wealthiest just keep doing better and better and better every single year. So the revenue that's been brought in by this measure has grown larger in terms of volume, as well as the number of filers that meet this. These rates are not just solely tied, say, to capital gains, right? So we feel that it is most just that the Californians that are doing the best continue to fund public education, healthcare, and all the services that the state's general fund helps bring to all Californians across the state.
Thank you. Next question. Should voters focus more on whether the state needs additional revenue or on whether the state spends existing revenue efficiently?
I think we'd always want revenue to be spent efficiently. Part of the guarantees in Prop 3 is actually that all the money that goes to school districts is audited, as well as it cannot be spent on administration. So we actually get to help students in the classroom, right, be more successful. But I would say that our general fund meets a lot of needs across this state, right? And I do think that as Democrats, we should be focused on increasing revenue to make sure that we can reach all kinds of our goals that our state budget supports, not just public education, but fire prevention, healthcare, right? We have a lot of needs all across the state. So we would argue that increased revenues are a good thing.
Perfect. Rather than making the tax permanent, should tax measures all have 10-year sunset clauses so voters can evaluate whether the measure is working?
Yeah, we've actually seen since voters have passed this twice, right, that we feel at this point that the certainty of making these rates permanent so that people can count on these revenues being there to support the programs that are important to Californians is actually more important at this point, right? We don't generally have sunsets on almost any propositions that come through California. We think that the stability this would provide to schools and the general fund and all of our priorities across the state are more important than having, periodic sunsets.
Thank you. And then lastly, what is the proper balance between encouraging economic growth and asking the wealthiest Californians to contribute more toward public services?
Yeah, we feel it's not like an and/or proposition, right? We can do both, and we've seen, quite frankly, since 2012 and 2016, that California's wealthiest have continued to do great, and they do better seemingly every year, right? And California's economy has grown, not shrunk, since we increased the tax rates on the top earning Californians, right? So we think that both can happen, just as this has happened basically over the last 14 years, where the economy can grow and we can continue to support progressive tax rates that help fund all of our state's priorities.
Thank you so much. And that is it for all the questions. Thank you so much for Michael for joining us
Of
this
course.
morning. And Jeff, you're up next.
Okay. Thanks, Christine. Now we are going to head into a discussion of the Prop 40, also known as the billionaire's tax. Proposition 40 would impose a one-time tax of up to 5% on the net wealth of California residents and trusts with more than $1 billion in covered assets as of the measure's effective date. Covered assets include businesses, stocks, bonds, private company ownership, intellectual property, art, and collectibles, but generally exclude real estate and certain retirement accounts. The legislative analyst estimates the measure would generate tens of billions of dollars over several years. The measure directs 90% of the revenue to healthcare programs and 10% to food assistance or education-related programs. It also specifies that these revenues cannot replace existing funds for these programs. They must be used in addition to current funding. At the same time, the legislative analyst warns that California could experience an ongoing reduction in income tax revenue if affected taxpayers relocate or otherwise change their tax behavior. Supporters argue that the measure asks only a small number of the wealthiest Californians to make a one-time contribution to protect healthcare and other essential services. Supporters include SEIU UHW, Teamsters of California, AFSCME, and Senator Bernie Sanders. Opponents argue it could encourage wealthy residents and businesses to leave California, reduce future tax revenues, and create legal and administrative challenges. Opponents include Governor Gavin Newsom, the California Teachers Association, California Primary Care Association, the California Medical Association, Planned Parenthood Affiliates of California, California YIMBY, and prominent billionaires such as Google co-founder Sergey Brin and Ripple Labs co-founder Chris Larson. Joining us this morning to speak in favor of Prop 40 are Gabriel Montoya and Doug Jones of SEIU UHW. Good morning, gentlemen. You have a total of 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and the proposition before we get into the questions. Go ahead.
Okay. Gabriel, if you'd like to introduce yourself and then on.
Yes. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is, it's still morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gabe Montoya, and I'm one of the regional political organizers for SEIU United Healthcare Workers in Southern California. Really what we are looking at right now is the potential for a healthcare collapse in California because the Trump administration through HR 1 gave the largest tax cuts in history to the most wealthiest people really on earth, but in the United States, one of the largest tax cuts they've ever received. And they're going to pay for it by taking really away funding from the entire country from Medicaid to the tune of $1 trillion over 10 years. And what that means for California is between 26 to $30 billion a year and a loss of revenue for Medicaid in this state. And that funding is really going to lead to the closure of hospitals, emergency rooms, labor and delivery departments, and really create a problem for those that are in skilled nursing facilities, which many of our veterans and seniors need. It's also going to affect those that are in home health services who all have to qualify for Medicaid to be on that program. And what it's going to do is potentially cost the state 145,000 healthcare jobs. And even beyond that, we expect that businesses that support healthcare will also see losses in revenue and losses in jobs. And so what we're doing here is not just about taxing the billionaires, but it's actually about keeping people alive, keeping people insured, and making sure that our economy doesn't see another hit of even more job losses than we've already seen this year. Go ahead, Doug.
Doug Jones, political organizer, SEIU UHW. Gabriel and I are the two members of our political staff who actually come from the rank and file. We were both hospital workers. We take this very seriously. It's important, in addition to the jobs issue that Gabriel just talked about, that we prevent mass suffering and death, because that's what's going to happen if millions of Californians lose their health insurance.
Okay, thank you for the introduction this morning. And before we get into the questions, I do want to make a note for speakers that we did modify our agenda slightly. We are going to be only discussing the billionaire's tax for about 30 minutes. We estimate that we're going to be going into Prop 41 around 10:50, and then Prop 42 around 11:05. So I just wanted to make that announcement real quick, should any of our other speakers be watching. And we'll jump into our questions. All right, gentlemen, would a one-time wealth tax have a meaningful impact on California's economy and investment climate? And if so, how? Questions have 1.5 minutes. Thank you.
All right. The billionaires, which have now grown to over 200 in the state of California, have grown their worldwide wealth by an average of 7.5% annually in recent years. This one-time 5% wealth tax over the next 5 years would leave them wealthier, even more obscenely rich at the end of the 5 years than they would be at the beginning. Concerns, by the way, let's keep in mind, not a business tax. It's a tax on the individual billionaires, not a tax on their businesses. So they've made their billions primarily through businesses that they've run in California. Why would they pull their businesses out of California if they're making such obscene amounts of money through their businesses here? And the final thing that I'd say about this is that speculation of this sort, speculation about the damage to revenue to the state budget from lost income tax, is speculative. And what's happened in other wealth taxes that have been passed in Massachusetts and Washington State is that there haven't been a large amount of wealth flight. What isn't speculative, though, is that people will die and people will suffer if we lose millions of people having their health insurance taken away. I put into the chat of the YouTube a link from an independent organization that talks about the fact that the state budget that was just passed takes millions of people off Medi-Cal.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Supporters have argued that the tax affects only about 200 people, as Doug just mentioned. Does the small number of taxpayers strengthen or weaken the case for the measure?
Look, here's what we know, right? We know that the reason why we are here in the first place, right, is because the Trump administration is utilizing Medicaid to pay for tax cuts for the most wealthy. And we already know that right now, most working class folks in the country are dealing with the affordability crisis, unable to afford rent, gas, and other necessities. And so what we didn't want to do was add another tax burden onto the working class folks of California to pay for their own health care. When we know that the tax base that we're going after, right, continues to exceedingly gain wealth faster than the working class. And so we think this is actually one of the features, right? This is the feature of Prop 40, is the fact that it taxes those 218 billionaires in the state that can afford to pay those taxes. And it's not something extraordinary that we're asking them. We are asking them to pay their fair share. I just want to remind folks, this is an emergency tax. It's 5%, right, of their total wealth. So they can pay the 5% up front, or they can pay 1% uh, per year for 5 years. But this does ensure that we are not adding some more taxes to folks who really at this point are stretched completely thin. I'm sure there are folks on this call who are listening to this webinar who they themselves, right, are listening, are paying, I'm sorry, are living paycheck to paycheck. And the billionaires could afford to do this. And they took a lot from the state, and it's time that they give back.
Thank you, Gabe. Is Proposition 40 primarily a question of economic policy or moral responsibility? In other words, should the focus be on the potential economic consequences of a wealth tax or on whether those with extraordinary wealth have a greater obligation to help fund public needs?
I really appreciate the framing of that question. What the billionaires have done by supporting Donald Trump, by literally standing behind him during the inauguration, by their many public statements that they have made that they are extremely happy with the performance of Donald Trump and the Republican Congress that is obscenely, for the first time in the history of the United States, taken a social welfare program and decimated it. And that, again, will lead to millions of Californians losing their health insurance. Um, the fact that many of these billionaires, not very many of them actually, when we talk about the 200 plus billionaires, the ones that have made noise and are spending money against this initiative are about 5 or 6. Those particular billionaires amongst them are people that stood behind Donald Trump at the inauguration. And what I'll say is that it's obscene what they're doing. The appalling lack of concern for their fellow man, that they want to enrich themselves so thoroughly that they would leave Californians in this state. The final thing I'm entering into, again, the chat of the YouTube is a statement from the California County Association, which points out that because of the fact that the bill or the budget that was just passed by the legislature does not fund Medi-Cal sufficiently, what it means is that, quoting them, counties will have no choice but to pull money away from other programs, especially public health, public safety, and efforts to reduce homelessness. This is from the counties of California.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Now, how practical is it to determine the value of privately held businesses, artwork, intellectual property, and other non-traditional assets? Could disputes over assets valuation reduce the effectiveness of the measure?
So look, we know when we wrote this, we totally expected this question to come up, right? And this is why we worked with some of the best economists in the country to really flush this completely out. We do not think it's impractical. What we know is we know that these people are billionaires because the amount of holdings that they have in publicly traded companies, right? And a lot of that is publicly filed and known, right? And that's probably where the majority of this is going to come from, right? There are definitely public records that billionaires have to file for the investments that they make, whether it's in, purchasing, I don't know, artwork, right? Of course, we know their stocks, things like yachts and jets, the total wealth, right? And so, there's only a couple of things that are actually exempt, from this, and that is the like real property that is individually held by the billionaires. Those are exempt, right? And we didn't frame this as an income tax. Let me make that clear. And the reason why, Jeff, we didn't frame this as an income tax is because we know that they are professionals out of hiding income, right? They hire people to just do that work for them. And so this is why total wealth had to come into the conversation, because we wanted to make sure that Californians weren't getting robbed out of having billionaires pay their fair share by them hiding it in other places.
All right. Thank you, Gabe. How practical is it to determine the value of, I'm sorry, that's the same question. Moving on to the next one. What safeguards should exist to ensure that the new revenue is spent as promised and achieves measurable results?
It's one of the things that we stressed when we put together the language for this initiative. There's no doubt that we did not want the state legislature and the governor to be able to mess around with this money in the general fund. The crisis was created by H.R. 1. And H.R. 1 does its super duper majority of damage to Medi-Cal. And that's why 90% of the revenue in this initiative is obligated to be spent on filling that Medi-Cal hole. The great news is that the billionaires have such obscene amounts of excess cash that just taxing those 200 billionaires at the 5% over 5 years rate will bring us the approximately $100 billion of revenue that the federal government took away. One of the reasons why we have, even after some counties and other jurisdictions have passed revenue measures in order to support their county healthcare systems, that they're still talking about taking away services and jobs. It's because there's no way a local initiative could fill that massive, massive budget hole. And the great news is that we are determined that 90% of the revenue going towards the Medi-Cal cuts will deal that. The other 10% will go towards a combination of K through 14 education funding and filling in the smaller hole that was left to the Cal Fresh program by the cuts that HR 1 did to the SNAP program.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Doug. Much appreciated. Now, opponents argue the measure could encourage billionaires to leave California, as Doug alluded to earlier in this session. How significant do you believe that risk is, and what evidence supports your view?
So I always like to remind folks that one, the reason why California has some of the most billionaires live in the state of California in the country is because this is where they come to become billionaires. And the reason why they come here to become billionaires is because the state has a lot to offer them, right? We have one of the largest public university systems in the entire world, right? Which creates the base of workers for them to become billionaires when they open up their businesses. California, gives millions and millions of dollars out in research, which all of these billionaires take advantage of when they're founding their businesses. We have the largest ports in the world are here in California. The largest transportation system in the world, freeway transportation system in the world, is right here in California. And what we also know is that other states who have passed wealth tax, for example, Massachusetts, did not see a huge attrition rate of millionaires moving out of the state. Because yes, they can probably afford to live anywhere they want, but they do have roots here, and there are benefits that they actually get that the taxpayers, the working class taxpayers of this state give them, which help create the fortunes that they are now living off of. And we don't believe that they're going to walk away from that. Now, maybe one or two, who knows? But what we know is that for the most part, the reason why they live here in the first place, the reason why we can even consider this type of tax is because it's because of California. It's because of the programs we have. It's because the benefits the state has. It's the first reason why there are over 200 billionaires that live here in the first place. And we don't think they're going to all leave our work. No, not going to happen.
All right, let's do a quick follow-up on that question. Both of you have mentioned Massachusetts. We'd like to know, many of us that are watching today or participating may not know a lot about the Massachusetts wealth tax. What was implemented and how did it affect the economy, and how many people did it actually apply to in Massachusetts?
Right.
So,
yeah, go ahead, Gabriel, if you know. Yeah.
So Massachusetts actually it was a millionaire's tax. It was not a billionaire's tax. But of course, if you're if you're someone that's a billionaire in that state, obviously you're going to qualify for that because it was $1 million and above. I don't know exactly how many millionaires and billionaires were affected in that state, but what we do know from what we've read is that it's about I think literally two of the wealthy folks that this tax targeted in Massachusetts actually left the state, right? We also know that just this last year, right, millionaires and billionaires were threatening to move out of Manhattan, right? If Senator Mondani was elected to office, and that they were going to leave because he was going to impose a 2% wealth tax in that city. And we know that that still hasn't happened. We know that there are prominent billionaires in this state now, today, here in California, who said that they have moved out of California. And yes, they can go and make their big bluster on social media and make the rounds on the media circuit and talk about how I moved to Florida because I'm avoiding these taxes in California. But we also know that we can call BS on that, because even when they move out of the state, they still qualify California as their primary residence in this state.
Right. I'll
And
add
so,
that, yeah, what Michael
go ahead,
mentioned
Doug.
earlier about there being more wealthy people in California since the education tax was levied. Similarly, in Massachusetts, there are more millionaires now
Yes.
than there were before the wealth tax was passed.
All right, before I move on to the next question, I'm noticing that the links aren't showing in chat. It is possible that for some reason uh, YouTube might be restricting the posting. I'll have to take a look at the settings on that when we get into Prop 4142. So just letting viewers know that we are taking a look to see how we can get that information shared out. All right, our next question. Does Proposition 40 send a message to entrepreneurs, investors, and businesses considering locating or remaining in California? And if so, what is that message?
Entrepreneurs need workers who have opportunities to get health care. And if we've created a situation where the healthcare system is decimated, look, a billionaire can afford to pay for acute healthcare, hospital care to come into their homes, but their workers can't. So they're going to have a workforce that's able to access a healthcare system. And it is bad for business when we have a healthcare system that's decimated. That literally the hospital that's nearby, the clinic that's nearby has either closed or reduced services. So it is not good for business for there to be a decimated healthcare system. And in fact, while there have been about 5 prominent billionaires who have made a bunch of noise and spent money against the initiative, there are also billionaires like the CEO of NVIDIA who has said, I'm gladly willing to pay this tax because I benefit greatly from being in the state, having the opportunities for capital, for talent, for infrastructure that California offers. In exchange for that, I'm happy to pay a tax which allows the healthcare system to continue. And he's not the only billionaire who has said he's going to stay in California and they happily pay the tax because he sees the value in it. So these would be my answers to these questions. Again, the billionaires will be wealthier than they were after the tax than before the tax. It's preposterous to say that this penalizes them in a way that's punitive.
All right, thank you, Doug. Although this is described as a one-time tax, does it establish a precedent for future wealth taxes in California? And should that concern voters?
No, I mean, look, here's the thing. We really need to really look at the entire picture here. And here's the entire picture. The entire picture is this. We had an administration in Washington, the Trump administration, who decided to be extremely irresponsible with the lives of millions of Californians by cutting $1 trillion out of Medicaid. And they were extremely irresponsible in doing that because they didn't consider how it was exactly have an impact. Or, and if they did, they didn't care on how it would impact working class folks, right? And so what Prop 40 does, it is actually gives us the opportunity to build a bridge between now and hopefully being able to elect a Democratic Congress and Senate
You
and
have 30
elect a
seconds.
Democratic president as an executive to this country that is willing to claw back and put back in place that funding. If Washington can get it together and start taxing billionaires in a way that they are paying their fair share and that the burden
15
isn't moved
seconds.
on those who already can't afford it. And then what we can do then there is not have to worry about having these emergency taxes passed in multiple states. This is being done out of necessity because the goal is to
Fine.
save lives. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Lee.
All right. Thank you, Gabe. Now, we are running a little bit ahead of time, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask you to give us a closing statement. Lee will set this at 2 minutes.
Okay.
And go ahead.
Okay, I'll begin, and Gabriel, I'll leave a little time for you. So again, Gabriel and I were healthcare workers for a long period of time. We take the need to provide healthcare for the community very, very seriously. And that's why Gabriel and I are proud that our statewide healthcare workers union has led the charge on this campaign. We're assembling a very, very large coalition. Amongst the things that happened during the period of time that we were collecting signatures, is the billionaires engaged in all sorts of mess in order to try to prevent us from qualifying this initiative, bragged semi-publicly that they were going to squash our ability to have the voters have their say. We overcame that in part because we assembled a coalition that helped us collect over 200,000 signatures on our petitions through volunteer efforts. Also, I think that's unprecedented in the state of California. Obviously, the paid program is a more substantial portion, but over 200,000 signatures through volunteers. That shows us that we have built a large coalition that is ready to take action, and we're planning on putting that into effect to make sure that Prop 40 is passed in November, and the California Democratic Party needs to be part of that in our view. Gabriel.
Yes, and I mean, here are the facts. These are facts. These are things that are going to happen. In 2027, these cuts are going to hit. In 2027, if we do not do something like passing Prop 47, we are going to see the collapse of our healthcare system in California, which was already kind of held together by cheap glue and duct tape to begin with, right? We are going to see emergency departments close. It is specifically going to disproportionately affect rural California, whose hospitals are already at risk. This is not just about we should tax billionaires because billionaires need to be taxed, which they do, but this is about literally saving lives. People who are, dealing with illnesses that they need in-home healthcare services for are going to lose that ability if this doesn't happen because we don't know where those Medicaid dollars will come from. It is so important that this gets done and it gets done now before it collapses.
Okay, thank you, Gabe and Doug. I do want to make a quick note here that I've done a search to find out, according to Oxfam America, the wealth of California billionaires has increased $487.2 billion. That's 31% increase between March 2025 and March 2026, reaching a total of 2.061 trillion. The 10 wealthiest California billionaires have seen an increase in their wealth by 48%. And how much is this asking of that wealth, Gabe?
Yes, this is asking 5% of that to be taxed. And what we always say is when you tax billionaires 5%, you still call them billionaires after they pay their tax.
Okay, thank you so much. I understand both of you will be sticking around for the related measures, Props 41 and 42. So back to you, Christine.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Prop 41, audits of new tax spending. What it does. Proposition 1 would require independent financial and performance audits of state programs funded by new taxes approved by California voters, including the revenue generated by Proposition 40, if that measure also passes. The audits would evaluate not only whether the money was spent legally, but also whether the funded programs achieved the results promised to voters. Now, audit reports would be made public and submitted to the governor and the legislator. The measure is intended to increase transparency and accountability for voter-approved tax increases. So how does it relate to Prop 40? The two propositions are closely linked together. Prop 40 raises revenue through a one-time tax on billionaires. Prop 41 establishes oversight by requiring independent audits of programs funded with revenues from new voter-approved taxes, including Prop 40 if it is approved. And now, as a result, if both pass, the new tax is imposed and spending of those revenues is subject to the audit requirements in Prop 41. If only Prop 40 passes, the tax is imposed without the additional audit requirements created by Prop 41. If only Prop 41 passes, the audit requirements would apply to future voter-approved taxes, but there would be no Prop 40 revenue to audit. The campaigns. Now, supporters frame Prop 41 as a taxpayer accountability and transparency measure. They argue that the new taxes should be subject to existing constitutional limits and regular independent audits so taxpayers know their money is being spent as promised. Now, this also is supposed to close a loophole. They argue that the recent ballot measures have allowed new taxes to be excluded from the state's appropriations limit, reducing an important constitutional check on government spending. It would also increase accountability. mandatory performance audits every 4 years would verify whether special tax revenues are being spent for the purposes voters approved, and it would also protect voter intent. If voters approve a tax for a specific purpose, taxpayers deserve a regular public report showing whether the promised results are being achieved. It would also promote fiscal discipline. Counting new special taxes toward the spending limit forces policymakers to prioritize spending rather than the continually expanding government. Opponents contend Prop 41 would make it harder for California to fund public priorities. Now, they argue that the measure adds unnecessary fiscal restrictions and administrative requirements that could interfere with implementing programs voters have already chosen to fund. It would restrict voter-approved investments. If Californians vote to approve taxes for schools, transportation, healthcare, or climate programs, those revenues could still be constrained by the state's spending limits. It would create unnecessary bureaucracy. Opponents argue many special tax programs already undergo audits, reporting requirements, or legislative oversight, making an additional statewide audit mandate redundant. It could also delay or reduce services. Spending limit restrictions could make it more difficult to use revenues that voters specifically approved for designated purposes. And it is a one-size-fits-all oversight. A mandatory audit every 4 years for every future special tax may impose costs, even for programs that are already performing well. So for questions, we already have Gabriel and Doug that have already introduced themselves, but we also have Kaylin Furr from SEIEW, UHW. So welcome, Kaylin. We will give you a minute and a half to introduce yourself. So go ahead.
All right. Thank you, everyone. My name is Kaylin Fodor. I'm here on behalf of the Yes on Prop 40 campaign, which is in opposition to Proposition 41. I'm happy to start to go into some of our takes on 41, or if this is just an intro, then I'm really excited to be here with everyone today and shed some light on Prop 41 and 42.
Go ahead and introduce the ballot measure as well.
Okay, so for Proposition 41, at first glance, and thank you so much for your incredible intro of what this proposed initiative would do. So at first glance, Prop 41 sounds like a straightforward government accountability measure. It talks about audits, oversights, making government programs more efficient, which of course are concepts that all Californians support, but as with many ballot initiatives, that title only tells part of the story. So my goal today is for folks to understand that when we actually look at Prop 41, we see that in context, it adds a lot of bloat to the system and is in direct conflict to Proposition 40, the California Billionaire Tax Act, and future investments in California. So Prop 41, as mentioned, has two components, requiring the state auditor to conduct new audits of programs, and then also to prohibit new state taxes enacted after January 1st of this year from being exempt from the California constitutional spending limit, commonly known as the GAN limit. Most importantly here, this contains language stating that if another ballot initiative like Prop 40 is in conflict, whichever initiative prevails, receives more votes will prevail. Oh, is that fine?
Thank you so much. So 2 questions. We will start off with the opposition first. So Kelly, you will go first. Should voters who
They're all on the same side.
Oh, on the same side. Sorry about that.
Everyone is in opposition. Thank you.
All in opposition. Sorry about that. Anywho, so first question, should voters, and then you guys can decide who wants to speak to. So should voters who support Prop 40 also support 41, or should the 2 measures be considered independently?
I don't think that it's possible to look at Prop 41 without the context of Prop 40. So this is an initiative that was specifically put on the ballot in an attempt to try and trick voters into undermining the California Billionaire Tax Act, which is Prop 40. It talks about doing audits, which, by the way, California already has an independent audit system, which already meets very high standards federally on waste, fraud, and abuse. So this is really not providing anything new other than a bigger burden on state employees. But really specifically here, this is an initiative that is funded by billionaire backers against Prop 40 in entirety to try and undermine what Prop 40 is trying to do, which is to save our healthcare system with a one-time modest tax on the wealth of billionaires. Billionaires who are also funding Proposition 41.
I'll add that they spent $25 a signature to collect petition signatures for this, mailed petitions to people's homes, did follow-up texts and phone calls. An obscene amount of money was spent by the billionaires to qualify this initiative because it's not easy to qualify an initiative that's so convoluted as this one. But they went to extraordinary measures in order to gather the signatures that were necessary to qualify. This gives you an idea of their sense of priorities, that they would rather spend money to qualify an initiative that would take away the ability to save lives and prevent suffering than, it really shows the sense of values from this set of very limited amount of bills.
Thank you. Next question. Should every voter approved tax increase automatically be subject to independent performance audits? And how does the proposed audits differ from existing audits?
So what I would say on this is that, like I said earlier, Prop 41 is just trying to apply more of what already exists. And what that means is that you're going to have a government that is dramatically slowed down and hampers its ability to do its job effectively. Audits already take place. Like I said, we already have an independent state auditor who deals with issues of waste, fraud, and abuse. This is really a Trojan horse vehicle to try and undermine what's being done by Prop 40. It's explicit, and we think that voters need to be aware of that component.
Yeah, I think it's also important that the 41 and 42 are really plays on the emotions of a lot of taxpayers and voters that already exist, right? So, there's this assumption that no one's providing any oversight in any of these dollars, right? And so this kind of is just made to feed into that, while at the same time really boiling down to just protecting the billionaires. The same thing with the other proposition, which we'll talk about later. But this really does just play on that anxiety. But what voters need to understand is these, special types of funding streams are already audited. They have oversight committees. All of that takes place. This is really just a way to get people to go, oh, we should have that. Let's vote on it, not realizing that in the process, we could be defunding our own healthcare system and also other future taxes that support general, programs that protect the working class folks of California.
Perfect. Next question. Who should conduct these audits to ensure that they are truly independent and free from political influence? And what safeguards should exist to ensure audit findings are acted upon rather than simply published?
So I would once again state that these are systems that already exist within the state of California. We already have a California state auditor who conducts new audits of programs funded by, or we already have this California state auditor who does this type of work, who does an incredible job of ensuring that there is not rampant amounts of waste, fraud, and abuse. We, of course, are very pro having transparent government. We believe that it's important that there is accountability in taxes that are done, but this is not what Prop 41 is about. Prop 41 is specifically about trying to undermine what's being done by Prop 40 to keep our hospitals open and ensure that billionaires are paying their fair share.
I'll add that the implementation of the Affordable Care Act in California has been done extraordinarily well over the course of the last decade plus, where we now have an uninsured rate in the state of California that went from 17% of our residents before the Affordable Care Act was passed and the state legislature and governor started expanding Medi-Cal eligibility. We now have an uninsured rate in California down to 6%. That means that more and more hospitals and clinics are paid when they give care to the patients who come into the emergency departments, to the clinics, and other places. This has been an extraordinarily successful implementation. It meets the standards that California voters want. It's something that the legislature and governor should be proud to trumpet, and it's really disappointing that the state legislature is now starting to take away Medi-Cal from people by not getting the revenue.
Thank you. And then lastly, does Prop 41 improve government accountability without affecting the underlying policy choices made by voters?
I think that adding on additional unnecessary audits does nothing to help accountability. It slows down the work that government employees are already doing and doing incredibly well.
To the point. To the point.
I mean, to the point, that's it, right? It really is. I mean, what it boils down to, again, like Kaylin said, is this is really just a Trojan horse, and they wrote an initiative that they felt would appeal to the skepticism that many voters have now about government, which actually goes back down to the very same people who put us in this position, right? Folks that have invested money in making sure that folks do not trust their government, right? And so they're feeding off those emotions and utilizing this as a way to really protect themselves, protect their own bottom line, while working class Californians still try to figure out how to pay for rent, food, gas, and healthcare. And that's what really this is about, protecting a few at the cost of many.
Yeah. And then the other thing too is that like Prop 41 creates an entirely new constitutional process. So we're talking about making it significantly harder for future voter approved funding measures to take effect. So of course we understand that this is in direct conflict with Proposition 40, but for any type of future initiative, this is going to have incredibly hard burdens on any type of voter funded initiative.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabriel, Doug, and Clayton. I believe you guys are still going to stay for the next proposition, the next Prop 40 adjacent initiative, which is 42. So on to the next one, Prop 42, prohibition on new personal and property tax and retroactive taxes. What it does. Prop 42 would amend the California's Constitution to 1. Prohibit the state and local governments from creating new taxes on personal property unless the California Constitution already expressly authorizes them. And then 2. Prohibit retroactive taxes, meaning taxes generally could not be imposed on transactions, income, or property for periods before the law takes effect. How it relates to Prop 40. Proposition 42 was written largely as a response to Prop 40. And it is designed to limit the state's ability to impose the types of taxes that Prop 40 would authorize. So how does it all fit together? Prop 40 imposes a one-time 5% tax on the net worth of California billionaires to fund healthcare, housing, and education and climate programs, while Prop 42 prohibits new taxes on retirement holdings, personal assets, savings, and ownership of property, beginning January 1st, 2026, and limits the state's ability to impose retroactive taxes. Prop 40 expands California's ability to tax accumulated wealth, while Prop 42 limits California's ability to adopt future wealth taxes. Prop 40 is supported primarily by advocates who believe the wealthiest Californians should contribute more to address major public needs, while in contrast, Prop 42 is supported primarily by taxpayer groups and other concerned about wealth taxes spreading beyond billionaires or discouraging investment. Now, whether there could be a direct legal conflict between Propositions 40 and 42, should they both pass, would ultimately depend on how courts interpret the language. Because Prop 42 broadly prohibits new taxes on ownership of personal assets and savings, many legal observers expect that there would be significant litigation if both passed, particularly over whether Prop 40's one-time billionaire wealth tax is barred by Prop 42. So the campaigns itself. Proponents claim that the measure is intended to provide taxpayers with greater certainty by preventing governments from adopting new forms of personal property taxation or applying tax laws retroactively. They argue it protects taxpayers and businesses from unexpected tax burdens. Opponents argue it could limit the state's ability to respond to changing economic conditions or close tax loopholes. So for this round of questions, we are again joined by Gabriel Montoya, Doug Jones, and Kaylin Porter from SEIU UHW. Since we have already introduced your team, you have 1 minute to introduce the proposition. Go for it.
All right. Thanks, Christine. So Prop 42 is another measure that our campaign is urging folks to vote no because of the conflicts with Prop 40. Supporters describe Prop 42 as a measure to protect Californians from new taxes on personal property and retroactive taxes, but our concern is that it's really designed to stop one specific policy, the California billionaire tax, Prop 40. Prop 42 would prohibit new taxes on personal assets because Prop 40 is a one-time tax on the wealth of California's roughly 200 billionaires that this measure directly conflicts with. So like Prop 41, it also includes language saying that if there's a conflict, that it would prevail. I will say that we do not say that this initiative would completely undo. We do not see the legal ground here that Prop 42 would completely eliminate Prop 40, but it's important for voters to be very clear that what they're voting on, the intention is to try and undermine Prop 40. And once again, the same billionaires who are going to be impacted by Prop 40 are the ones funding Prop 42. People should be aware that this is a Trojan horse initiative.
Thank you. So first question, and kind of mentioned a little bit, what problem is Prop 42 intended to solve, and how common is that problem in California?
Prop 42 is designed to try and solve a problem for 200 billionaires, which is the one-time 5% tax that they're going to have to pay on their wealth to keep California hospitals open and our healthcare working. That's what it's designed to do.
And I think it's darkly amusing that one of the ways in which they've assembled a small, very tiny coalition of labor supporters behind this initiative by putting in that this would help protect pensions. You've got to be kidding me. Billionaires are so hungry to get a hold of private and public pensions. They have shown themselves to do so over the course of decades. It's preposterous to say that they would draw the specific language of this initiative that would actually protect public and private sector pensions. I think it's just obscene that they would make that argument, and hilarious, because that's not the character of these people. It's not what they want to do. They built their wealth by raiding pension funds, and it's hurt Californians in the process.
Thank you. Next question. Should taxpayers and businesses have a constitution guarantee that the government cannot tax certain properties, or that the new taxes cannot be applied retroactively? Why or why not?
So I think that, to Doug's point here, that this is one of the arguments that you'll hear, that this is about wanting to protect retirement and have some oversight in taxes. But it's really important to separate, campaign messaging from what's actually happening here on the ground. There is no proposal before California voters to broadly tax teachers' pensions, firefighter retirement accounts, nurses' 401ks, or just like our regular Roth IRAs. Like Prop 40 does none of those things. This is just messaging that our opposition knows is really attractive to people. And Lord knows we all want to protect our retirement accounts. That's not what's happening here. Prop 40 does none of those things. It applies only to Californians whose wealth exceeds $1 billion. And we think that's really important to know. This is not about taxing working families.
Thank you. What types of personal property would be affected by this measure, and who would benefit the most from the prohibition on new personal property taxes?
Well, the people who are going to benefit most from Prop 42 are the people who are going to be taxed under Prop 40. And this is, once again, it's about 250 people in the state of California who have a global net worth of over $1 billion. And by the way, Prop 40 is designed to make sure that your primary residence is not included here. Prop 40 is not going to drive any billionaires out of house and home.
I would add that the portion of Proposition 42 that adds additional burdens onto passing local ballot initiatives is very offensive as well. Proposition 13 has done tremendous damage to the state of California in its highly undemocratic principles. To cut taxes, you need a majority of voters. To raise taxes, oftentimes, both at the state and the local level, you need supermajorities. So how many times have we seen local initiatives that have gotten 64.6% of the vote? Oh, they failed. It's a preposterous situation, and it really hurts and kills people in the case of the healthcare cuts. So it's important to know that they're also putting this additional poison pill to make Proposition 13's impacts even worse in terms of what local jurisdictions can do to raise the revenue they need to provide basic services. People come to the city council and the board of supervisors meeting saying, do something about the homelessness problem. If you have insufficient revenue to respond to it, then you can't respond to that properly, and people just complain more and more that government doesn't do what it needs to do.
Now, could Prop 42 make it more difficult for the state or local governments to raise revenue during fiscal emergencies?
Absolutely. And the LAO analysis is very clear here. Prop 42 is an initiative that could cost the state millions of dollars in ongoing revenue because of the way that it's designed. And something else to know about Prop 42, it is an incredibly broadly written constitutional initiative. Of course, I am here today to make sure people really understand that the purpose of Prop 42 is to attempt to undermine Prop 40, the billionaire tax. But should Prop 42 pass, this is going to have lasting implications on California's ability to respond to fiscal crises in ways that are going to make it impossible for us to raise the type of revenue needed to ensure that, one, importantly for us, that our healthcare system is protected, but any type of tax that is going to be used for public goods here. So for education, for climate, for you name it, Prop 42 is going to have devastating impact on those types of taxes because it's going to very, very broadly limit our ability to react to these types of problems.
Thank you so much. Because we have a little bit of extra time, I'm going to go ahead and we'll allow you to guys for any closing comments. Lee, let's give them 2 minutes on this.
So for Prop 41 and for Prop 42, these initiatives on their face value purport to do good things that I think all Californians agree with. What's important to remember is that's not their intention, and the impacts that these initiatives would have don't only undermine Prop 40, they would also have severe implications for any type of voter-approved initiative going forward to deal with taxes, to raise revenue for issues that we all care about. We also want to remind folks that these initiatives are funded by the very billionaires who will be taxed under Prop 40. Do not be fooled by the type of poison pill that they are attempting to put on the ballot this year. The final thing that I will say is that we are also standing in oppositions to Prop 41 and 42 with Senator Bernie Sanders because he understands that these initiatives are designed in an attempt to undermine a really important issue in California, which is Prop 40, and we're proud to have his support in opposition to Prop 41 and 42.
You have 1 minute left.
We ask those of you who are watching this webinar who are on the executive board of the California Democratic Party to be prepared to vote for the state party's endorsement of Proposition 40 when it comes up next week, and against the endorsement of and to oppose Propositions 41 and 42 when it comes to the vote next week. And Gabriel and I are looking forward to seeing you down at the meeting next weekend in San Diego.
30 seconds.
I mean, I'll just say this. At the end of the day, our goal with Prop 40 is to protect the mass in California, the working class folks every day who are trying to just make ends meet. And Prop 41 and 42 are just designed to protect the richest of the rich in this country. And quite frankly, they've had enough protections and enough people on their side. It's time for Californians to come together and take the moral stance and fight for healthcare. And we're going to do that by passing yes on Prop 40.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much again, Gabriel, Doug, and Kaylin for joining us today. And Jeff, take it away.
All right. So that is it for our webinar, our informational forum this morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, for watching online. If you're watching it afterwards, keep in mind that this is posted to our regional director's YouTube channel, so you can always find it there after the fact. This information does not expire before the election, so you can still continue seeing this information up until the election. Post the link to other people so that they get the information that they need in order to vote and make their decision before the election this fall. So thank you again, everybody. I want to thank the Region 15 Director, Christine Salazar, Region 4 Director, Lee Miller, and our guests this morning from CTA and SEIU UHW. And once again, thank you, everyone. For those of you that are going down to the Executive Board in San Diego next week, I'll see you there. Have a good one.